Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and WeissAdvice here on YouTube. Sometimes on this channel I talk about mix technique, sometimes on this channel I do general mix walkthroughs and overviews, sometimes I just talk about philosophy and the general goings on of a producer, recordist, mix engineer. This video is going to be a little different. This video I'm going to be talking about a very interesting phenomenon that happens while mixing. It only works if the production is done in a certain way. The inspiration for this video was a comment left on yesterday's video from Lieb Caleb, who said that the vocal, even before I did any processing, felt like it had its own pocket, and that it kind of already worked. And that's true, but there's actually something else kind of going on as well. So I'm going to play this record, I'm going to give it a listen, and then I'm going to bypass my effects on the instruments only. Let's check this out.
Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'm a flown it, so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bout my biz, don't f with them cats that do pretend. Cause I'm good, cause I got you. Baby, know that I ought to talk about this game. Yeah, you are up too. I be on my grind, don't feel that. Talk about this money, yeah, I can hear that. I be doing my own.
Okay, now, let's bypass the effects. Let's listen again.
Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'm a flown it, so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bout my biz, don't f with them cats that do pretend. Cause I'm good, cause I got you. Baby, know that I ought to talk about.
Okay, now I'm going to play it in reverse order. I'm going to play what we just heard. Then I'm going to turn my effects on the instruments, meaning all the music stuff. Vocal, same thing, exact same thing. But what I want you to do is listen to the size of the vocal. Interesting.
Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'm a flown it, so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bout my biz, don't f with them cats that do pretend. Cause I'm good, cause I got you. Baby, know that I ought to talk about this game. Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'm a flown it, so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bout my biz, don't f with them cats that do pretend. Cause I'm good, cause I got you. Baby, know that I ought to talk about.
We'll play it one more time. Listen to the size of the vocal. All the effects are going to be in, but midway through playing them, I'm going to turn the effects off.
Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'm a flown it, so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bout my biz, don't f with them cats that do pretend. Cause I'm good, cause I got you. Baby, know that I ought to talk about this game. Yeah, you are up too. I be on my grind, don't feel that. Talk about this money, yeah, I can hear that. I be doing my own, y'all gon' hate, but that bullshit I don't condone.
So it's really weird how the perception of the voice changes when I bypass my effects. On the one hand, the vocal immediately dominates the track because the track becomes a lot smaller. But we also sort of become aware of a thinness to the vocal that we weren't aware of before. And the reason why this is happening is because the vocal is constructed to work around the other elements, and the other elements are constructed to work around the vocal. So when the other elements are providing energy in places that the vocal isn't, I can remove energy where the vocal shouldn't have it and create a bigger sound overall. So the interesting thing that happens is that even though the entire record feels like it's gotten a lot fuller, which in theory should make the vocal feel smaller, it kind of does the opposite. Now, in order for this to actually happen correctly, that starts in the production. There is no way to really do this in the mix if the producer isn't allowing space for the vocal to begin with. That's really important, and I think it's probably the most overlooked aspect of making production, particularly hip-hop production and EDM production, particularly EDM production, especially from EDM producers who are not used to working with vocalists. When you are introducing a vocal to a record, you have to understand that, like it or not, that vocal is effectively 50% of the record. There is no working around the fact that psychologically human beings will tune into hearing a human voice. Doesn't matter if it's quiet, doesn't matter if it's loud, doesn't matter if it's on the left, doesn't matter if it's on the right, caked in reverb 40 miles away. There's something psychologically about a human voice that our ear just naturally attunes to. if you overstuff a record with too many different moving parts in too many different frequency ranges and have a very dense arrangement, it's going to be tough to have a large sounding vocal. You're going to have to start making compromises. Now, there are wonderful ways to do that. We'll talk about those in other videos and things like that. But when you leave space for a vocal, what it allows the mixer to do is make everything and the voice all bigger and take up some of that space. So the takeaway from that is just when you're producing, especially if it's vocal-centric music, think about where the voice is going to be. Even maybe use like an acapella as a stand-in or something like that. And place your elements around so that it considers that. Then remove the voice. This is not only going to help get better sounding records, but if you happen to be looking for placements with artists, it's going to make it easier for the artist to hear themselves in the record. So I find that arrangements that are easier for a vocalist to work with tend to get placed more often. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do a complex arrangement, by the way. I think that there's a real art to doing an arrangement that has lots of inner moving parts and interesting layers and tones and textures that complement each other while still leaving room for the vocals. In my mind, those oftentimes are the best production because they give you a lot of ear candy, they give you a lot of soul, they give you a lot of content and energy, but they still allow for whatever that top line is going to be to shine. And I think that's masterful level production. Okay, so with all that said now, I do want to go through some of the things that I'm actually doing in this mix in order to make it sound pretty significantly fuller. Starting from the lower parts of the arrangement here, this is all kind of my peripheral stuff. We've got these bell noises, risers, impacts, this weird little cat synth thing. Neat. Some hi-hats. I'm doing almost no processing on these. They all sound great to begin with. They all are doing exactly what they need to be doing. There's a little tiny bit of EQ on the hi-hats. I'm bringing up a little bit of 16K on both of the hi-hats. I felt like they were just a little dark for the style of the record. I get what the producer was going for, but I think that they were still a little bit dark. So just want to point out that there's a lot of stuff where I'm not really doing anything. As we kind of start moving up, you'll see that there's a little bit more action going on in these elements, and that's because as I'm moving toward the top, I'm getting to the things that I consider more important and fundamental to the record. The snare, I don't know why it ended up here. It is definitely an important part of the record. There's no question about that. But it's basically just EQ happening. This is a fancy EQ, but there's not a lot happening with this EQ that really needs to be pointed out. I'm taking out some 60 hertz in the snare. There was some low-end buildup. I don't think that requires too much explanation, and then I'm adding some top-end brightness because I felt like the snare was just overall a little dark, so we started here. Actually, yeah, and that's flat. That's literally doing nothing. So we started here. Which sounds fine on its own, but just in the context of the record, I felt like some of the snare needed some texture. Nice. Sounds really good. Looks like I'm adding a little bit of like 800 as well, and that's where the body is coming from. So nothing crazy happening there. And then this EQ is not even doing anything. I'm not even really sure why it's active. So there we go. I did experiment with doing a triggered texture layer, but ultimately I decided I didn't like it. The snare was doing its thing already. Moving on up, we have a happy drum. So this is making just a little bit of space for the vocal and also cutting some unnecessary lows. I'm not very hardcore about high-passing everything. That's not really my jam, but I'm all about high-passing and cutting lows on things that don't need lows. So we didn't need a lot of 60 cycles in the snare. We cut down some of those with a shelf. We don't really need any of the stuff that's below 80 hertz in this happy drum, so I'm just hard shelving it off. I'm not worried about the transient response here because it's not, well, it is a transient element to an extent. It's more of a melodic element, so I'm not too worried about like how hard it's smacking. That's more like what I'm thinking about the snare. And then this cut right here at 800 is very specifically to make room for the vocal, so helping to give it that little pocket.
Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'm a flown it, so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bought my biz.
This is my favorite element in the entire record, although I didn't mix it all that loud, which is atypical just because it's a kind of bright element. This really cool, weird hi-hat thing. It's kind of neat. And it's one of those things where it's weird, but it works. And there's a lot of times where I hear people do weird stuff and it does not work at all. But especially in like, pop contexts and things like that. But there it just sounded really cool. Only thing I'm doing to it is I'm using room widener to kind of give it a little bit more stereo spread. But that's it. It's nothing else to it. Otherwise, sounds great. Another element with nothing on it at all. It already came with reverb on it. The tone is perfect. So, yeah, nothing. A little bit of panning. I'm panning it a little bit to the left. The hi-hat flange thing, I'm panning a little to the right. I've got a downshifter that I've panned a little to the left. And then above it, there's another guitar that's off a little bit to the right. So sometimes when we're making room for vocals, we're not doing it with EQ. We're doing it with pan. So all of those pan positions were to kind of make room and just give a sort of center lane for the kick, snare, and vocal, which is a very, very common hip-hop approach to things, but I find that it works really, really well pretty much every genre except for anything that's like supposed to be a little bit more melodically dominated. So certain types of EDM, singer-songwriter stuff, folk stuff, some types of rock. We might want more of like a center element of some sort that's melodic. But for anything that's kind of more in the hip-hop vein or like reggaeton or dance hall kind of vein, kick, snare, vocal as your primary center elements is not a bad way to go. So works in this instance, and that's why I'm doing it. All right, kick drum. Again, not much. I felt like it just needed a little bit more weight to it, but not a lot. So very, very tiny bit. Now, I am sending this off to a sidechain in pre-fader mode. That's going to do something kind of interesting that I'm going to point out on the bass. Now, the bass is getting a lot of processing. The bass sounded like this. Which to me is very drab. This is something where it's trying to emulate a more analog style bass that then has like a reverb on it, but it feels very thin. It doesn't have all of the like little subtle modulations and saturations that make an analog synth sound like really, really rich. So it's just not completely there. There are digital synths that do that very well. This just doesn't seem to be one of them. So one thing that I want is I want more of that primary body to come up. So the very first thing that I'm doing, a lot of times when we're playing with bass, especially in these styles of genres, we're really looking at the sub-range, but the sub-range is not the only thing that happens in the bass. The primary bass range is like around 100 hertz, and I feel like that's what we needed in this sound. A good way to think about it is like the sub frequencies are going to be that powerful, heavy part that we physically feel. And the primary bass range, the 1 to 200 hertz kind of ish area, sometimes a little lower, sometimes a little higher, it depends on the element. But that's going to be the melodic side of the bass. It's the note that the bass is giving us. And in this particular case, I felt that's what it needed. The other thing I want to do is I want to spread it out. I want to get it out of the center. So that's a 3.5 dB bump to the sides. And then, because this kind of seems to affect the mids and sides a little differently, these two plugins, they don't really sound the same to me, although it's very hard for me to express in exact words the difference. It's like this one just makes things louder in the sides, and this one kind of like proportionately stretches it out. But there's also like a difference in the phase quality. So I'm using both. This could be my imagination. I'm not going to lie. Like, this could be completely a psychosomatic thing that I'm seeing, but I did it because either it really is widening the bass in a more pleasing way than just relying on one of these plugins, or I've just tricked myself into it. Either way, I'm doing it this way because the end result sounds right. So now we get this nice wide bass pad. We started in the center. We ended with lots of side information. Started from the center, now we're here. Okay, anyway. That's an important idea because, again, when I'm stretching up those sides, that's a place where the vocals aren't really living as much. So it allows me to make the record bigger without necessarily stepping on the voice. This is a really, really good way of supporting an overall bigger image. Now, the next one's kind of interesting. I have multi-band expansion on the bass. So we're probably used to the technique where you want to make more room for the kick. So if you have like especially a padded droning bass like this, you send it to a compressor. You send the kick to a compressor that's on the bass, and every time the kick hits, the compressor attenuates the bass. It's called ducking. And it can be a very useful technique when you want the kick to be more audible versus the bass. But here, I don't have that problem. If I listen to the kick and the bass at the same time, I have no problem hearing the kick at all. And I mean, like, no problem hearing any part of the kick. It's not like the sub of the kick is being masked or anything like that. Right, clear as day. So what I'm doing is actually the opposite. Every time the kick hits, I'm actually turning the bass up. So the low, and just the low end of the bass, just the stuff that's underneath 120 hertz. So basically, every time the kick hits, there's a slow attack time on this expander. I'm in expand mode, and so it's going to it's going to gain the bass up, but it's going to gain the bass up slowly. So the initial attack, we're not really going to get any gain on the bass, but as the kick is decaying, we're getting a little bit more gain on the bass. And what ends up happening is we end up getting a fuller sounding kick and a fuller sounding low end. It's a very interesting kind of approach. It's one of those things where when people tell you, like, do it this way, I sometimes get that gut instinct to be like, no, I'm going to do exactly the opposite. You know what I mean? Like, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do it my way. It's the opposite of ducking, and it works really well. And it's subtle, but it creates this kind of pillowy texture underneath the kick that I think fattens up the entire low end. So I think that's pretty darn cool. A little bit of just gain on the bass, and then rolling off some of the very deep lows. Basically, it's a very, very heavy sub bass. It doesn't need all that sub. There's also about 2.5 dB of gain on the output of this. So I'm attenuating sub by 5 dB, but then I'm pushing the whole thing up by 3.5 dB overall. So we're going to hear all of the tones and textures come to life. And again, this is all happening in a range that the vocal is not really living in. This is all stuff that's kind of in the deeper lows, where it's not like the voice isn't there at all, but we can kind of push these up pretty high, and we don't really have to worry about the main part of the vocal getting masked too much. And we certainly haven't gone so far as to actually run that risk quite yet. Last one is going to be the marimba. This one is the element that took the most amount of work for me. And it took the most amount of work because this is the main driving element. When I talk about the basics of a mix, one of the things that I typically advise people to do is figure out what the main driving element is and spend as much time on that as time will allot for, because the song is all built around this marimba sound. I like the side-to-side width. I think that's good, but to me, this is just a very dull sound. It feels like it's all kind of living sort of like thinly in the mids. So like, yeah, there's a little bit of snap to it, and there's some color, and it's mostly like 800 hertz though. That's just kind of like there. So I really want to bring the rest of it to life, and I I have to say, you know, it's really important to be fearless about this stuff sometimes. So if I want there to be more brightness and color and energy and life in something, the way that I start that is I'm going to turn the EQs as far as I can push them, and I'm going to let the musical element tell me if I've gone too far. So let me say that again, because this is a really, really important gem. All right. When you want to bring something to life, go as far as the EQ will let you, and then let the EQ, or let the element itself, let the marimba here tell us if we went too far. All right? Let's check it out. Now, I hear all of that attack a lot more clearly, but is that too far? Just imagine pretend the EQ was never on there, and pretend the sound just came in this way. Would you say it was too bright? I don't think so. I might say it's a little on the bright side, but I mean, considering what the element is, I don't think it sounds overly bright to me. So here we are with a 15 dB boost at 6K. Doesn't sound too much to me. Now, there's a little bit of other stuff going on here. That mid-range where we hear, like, the main color tone texture type of stuff, to me, that felt like it needed to have a lot more going on. Like, this is a very harmonically stale sound. It needed a lot of color. So I have the drive here. I have it on tape mode, which is not the subtlest mode, and I have the drive turned way up. I'm also doing some stuff dynamically here, messing around with some dynamics in the lows. High end I left alone, but basically, you know, the main thing here is just really pushing the drive on this mid-range band. So before and after. And you'll notice, if you look at the peak level on the meter over here, it's peaking around the same place. Such is the power of harmonics. So big change there. And then there's one other thing that I'm doing that I think is subtle, but it's kind of suave. There is a couple of lines where the marimba gets a little quiet. So I'll play it a little earlier, actually. I'll play it from here. We have these kind of inside notes, do-do-do-do, right? And then the dink-dink. So kind of quiet. I'm using, and I don't use this very often, so this is one of those things where, like, don't go crazy with this. You can probably go for a large portion of your mixing career without ever needing this particular technique. But I'm compressing just the sides so that I can get those inside notes to stick out a little bit more. So the mid channel I'm leaving completely alone. I'm compressing only the side channel because that's where these elements are living. It's just to get those inside to come out a little bit more. So that is all of my treatment on the actual elements. I wanted to show that. I'm going to play a little bit of this record down just so we get to hear it. And yeah, I'm running this print and sending it off to mastering.
In the morning, even in the evening time, I be on my paper chasing it. I be on the grind. I get this Monday, I get this Monday, I get this Monday, I get this Monday. I be on my paper chasing it. I be on the grind.
Wake up, yeah, you know I'm gon' get it. I'ma flown it so you know I'm gon' spin it. Yeah. Understand I be bought my biz, don't with them cats that do pretend. Cause I'm good, cause I got to. Baby, know that I ought to talk about this game.
So I'm going to wrap it up here, but I actually want to add one more thing to this video, one more thought. A lot of the times I work with producers who don't want to send track outs to their production. And I actually understand why. They will work very hard to create a very specific sound. A lot of producers, particularly in the hip-hop world, reggaeton world, dancehall world, they'll take a lot of time to find drums that they really like, sounds that they really like. And I think that most producers who have been in the game long enough have had the experience of sending track outs, like multi-tracks, of their beat to engineers and having the engineer absolutely butcher what they're doing. A good engineer, an experienced engineer, a mature engineer, does what's needed to be done and does not do other stuff. So on the marimba and the bass, am I doing a lot of stuff? Yes, because I felt those two elements really needed to come out in a pronounced way. But for most of this beat, I'm really not doing much. I'm mostly just setting levels in a way that complement the vocal. That's it. So when I'm the type of engineer who will tell you, like, if you hear something that needs to be done, I'll add backup vocals to us. There's records that have gone out there where I've been singing on the record and people just don't know because of where I've placed my own voice. Like, I will do what needs to get done in order to make a record be amazing. But I also have the maturity to know that not doing things is also a really important part of the process. Acknowledging what the producer has done really well and the perfection of the sounds that already work and sound great is a mixing skill and something that really does need to be acknowledged. Okay, long video, but a lot of important ideas, I think, and I really wanted to get them out there. So let's wrap up here. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notifications so you get notified. If you want to check out some full-length tutorials, I have a bunch for sale in the WeissAdvice.com shop, and that link will be in the description below. If you want to really, really master any kind of signal processing you can think of, those are the tutorials to get. Because if you think that this free tutorial that I'm doing here on YouTube, this is just a random Wednesday video, right? So if you picked up like 5 really cool tips or something like that, this is what I do for free. What I do for sale, super in depth. So check that stuff out. And lastly, you know what we say here at Weiss Advice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.